The rain fell like bullets against the hospital windows, each droplet exploding against the glass with a violence that matched the storm raging inside my chest. 16 hours. That's how long I'd been on my feet, moving between crying children and worried parents, administering medications and comfort in equal measure. My scrubs clung to my skin, damp with sweat, and the humidity that always seemed to permeate the pediatric ward at Mercy General. I pulled my hair from its messy bun, dark strands sticking to my neck as I finally clocked out. The night shift would take over now. Fresh faces to handle the never-ending stream of emergencies that a public hospital attracted. My feet screamed in protest as I made my way toward the staff exit. Every step a reminder of why I needed to find a second job soon. Ethan's school fees weren't going to pay themselves. The parking garage was a tomb of concrete and shadows, my footsteps echoing off the walls like gunshots. The storm had intensified while I'd been inside, turning the night into something apocalyptic. Lightning illuminated the garage in stark, terrifying flashes, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very foundation of the building. I was halfway to my beat-up Honda when I heard them. Voices, urgent and angry, coming from the level above. Spanish mixed with something else, words I couldn't quite catch over the rumble of the storm, but the tone was unmistakable. Hunting voices. Predator voices. My blood turned to ice when I heard my name. Aurora Hayes, enfermera. Works the pediatric ward. They weren't looking for me specifically. They were looking for someone who matched my description. Someone who worked where I worked. But in this light, in this storm, with my dark hair plastered to my head and my hospital ID still clipped to my chest, I was close enough. I ducked behind a concrete pillar, pressing my back against the cold surface. My phone was dead, had been for the last 3 hours of my shift. The landlines were floors away. Might as well have been on another planet. I was alone, trapped, with nowhere to run except deeper into the garage. The voices grew closer, accompanied by the heavy footfalls of men who weren't concerned about stealth. They knew their prey was cornered. Elena should have delivered the shipment yesterday, one of them said, the accent thick and unforgiving. Boss isn't happy about delays. Elena. They were looking for Elena Vasquez, my friend from nursing school, the one who'd been acting strange lately, paranoid, jumping at shadows, the one who'd asked me to cover her shifts without explanation, offering cash payment that I'd been too proud to accept. Check every floor. She has to leave eventually. I had maybe 30 seconds before they reached my level. The stairwell was blocked by their position. The elevator would trap me. But there, just 10 feet away, sat a car that hadn't been there when I'd arrived that morning. A sleek black Maserati with tinted windows, sitting in the shadows like a predator at rest. The passenger door was unlocked. I didn't think. Thinking would have paralyzed me, would have made me consider the wisdom of climbing into a stranger's expensive vehicle. Instead, I ran, bent low, and threw myself into the back seat just as the first man appeared on my level. The interior smelled of leather and something else. Something dark and expensive. Cedar, maybe, mixed with the metallic scent of danger that I'd learned to recognize in the emergency room. I pressed myself against the floor, making myself as small as possible, praying that the tinted windows would hide me from view. That's when I heard the driver's door open. My heart stopped. Someone had been in the car all along. Someone who now knew exactly what I'd done. I held my breath, waiting for shouts, for demands, for the rough hands that would drag me out and deliver me to the men who were hunting someone who looked just like me. Instead, I heard the soft sound of a car door closing. The engine purred to life, a sound like controlled power, like leashed violence, and then a voice, low and measured, speaking with the kind of authority that made my spine tingle with warning. You have 10 seconds to explain why you're in my car before I decide you're a threat. The accent was different from the hunters above. Italian, maybe, wrapped around words that held the promise of violence. I raised my head slowly, meeting eyes in the rearview mirror that were so dark they seemed to absorb light. Even in the dim garage, I could see the sharp planes of his face, the strong jaw, the kind of cold beauty that warned of danger. Please, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the storm. There are men looking for me. I think they want to hurt me. He studied me in the mirror, those dark eyes calculating, measuring. I could feel him taking in my hospital scrubs, my exhausted face, the terror that I couldn't quite hide. What men? I don't know. They mentioned Elena Vasquez, but I think they confused me with her. Please. I just need somewhere to hide until they're gone. Above us, footsteps echoed through the concrete structure. Voices called out, growing frustrated. The man in the driver's seat glanced up, then back at me, his expression unreadable. Stay down. Two men appeared at the far end of the level, flashlights cutting through the darkness. They moved systematically, checking between cars, looking for their target. When their beams swept over our vehicle, I pressed myself deeper into the leather seats, certain they would see me. But the tinted windows held their secrets. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the men moved on to the next level. Their voices faded, swallowed by the storm and distance. The man in front of me waited another full minute before speaking again. They're gone. I sat up slowly, my muscles protesting after being cramped in the small space. Thank you. I can go now. I just need to get to my car. He turned in his seat to face me fully, and I got my first clear look at him. Tall, even sitting down, with dark hair swept back from a face that belonged in Renaissance paintings. Handsome, in the way that dangerous men were handsome. Beautiful and terrible at once. A small scar marked his chin, and when he smiled, it didn't reach his eyes. I don't think so. The simple statement sent ice through my veins. What do you mean? He gestured toward the windshield, where two black SUVs had appeared, blocking the garage exits. Those men aren't looking for Elena Vasquez. They're looking for Aurora Hayes, pediatric nurse, lives on Maple Street with her 17-year-old brother, drives a 2018 Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper. My breath caught in my throat. How do you know that? Because I make it my business to know everything that happens in my city. He reached into his jacket and I tensed, but he only withdrew a phone, including when someone puts a price on a nurse's head. I don't understand. His dark eyes studied me with an intensity that made me feel exposed, vulnerable. Your friend Elena stole something valuable from some very dangerous people. They think you might know where she is, or where she hid what she took. I don't know anything about Elena's problems. We barely speak anymore. I believe you. The admission surprised me, but they won't. And now that you've been seen with me, you're in more danger than you know. Seen with you? We just met 30 seconds ago. That cold smile returned. My name is Lorenzo Dante Costa. And in about 5 minutes, every criminal organization in this city is going to know that Aurora Hayes was in my car, which means they'll assume you're under my protection. The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it, like I should recognize it, like everyone should, made my blood run cold. I want to go home. Home isn't safe anymore. He started the engine, the Maserati responding with a growl that seemed to echo off the garage walls. You're coming with me. It's not a request. I reached for the door handle, but it didn't budge. Child locks, or something more sophisticated. I was trapped in a car with a stranger whose name apparently carried weight in circles I didn't want to know existed. This is kidnapping. This is survival. Lorenzo pulled out of the parking space with fluid grace, navigating toward an exit I hadn't seen. The alternative is you end up like the last person who crossed paths with the men who were hunting you tonight. And trust me, Aurora Hayes, you don't want to know what happened to her. The garage door opened at our approach, revealing the storm-lashed street beyond. As we pulled into the night, I caught a glimpse of the black SUVs in the mirrors, still circling like sharks scenting blood. I was no longer Aurora Hayes, pediatric nurse who worked double shifts to support her brother. I had become something else entirely, a piece on a board I didn't understand, in a game whose rules I didn't know. And the man driving me into the darkness held all the cards. The gates that opened for Lorenzo's car weren't just impressive, they were intimidating. Wrought iron twisted into intricate patterns that somehow managed to look both beautiful and threatening, like everything else about the man who commanded them. The driveway stretched ahead, flanked by perfectly manicured trees that seemed to stand at attention in the darkness. I pressed my face to the window, watching the landscape transform from urban chaos to something that belonged in a different world entirely. Soft lighting illuminated gardens that probably cost more than most people's houses, and in the distance, a mansion rose from the darkness like something out of a Gothic novel. This is where you live? Lorenzo's eyes found mine in the rearview mirror. One of the places. The casual way he said it sent another chill through me. One of the places. How many homes did a person need? And what kind of person could afford multiple mansions? The kind who had men hunting other people in hospital parking garages, apparently. The car came to a stop under a covered portico, and immediately 2 men appeared from the shadows. They moved with the fluid grace of professionals, hands resting casually on their hips, where I could just make out the outline of concealed weapons. Neither spoke, but they nodded respectfully to Lorenzo as he stepped out of the car. "Don't run," he said quietly, opening my door. "There's nowhere to go, and my men might misinterpret sudden movements." I climbed out on shaking legs, hyper-aware of the armed men watching my every move. The storm had followed us here, rain lashing against the portico's roof in a steady rhythm that sounded like a countdown. The front door opened before we reached it, revealing an interior that took my breath away. Marble floors stretched across a foyer that could have housed a small airplane, and a chandelier hung overhead like captured starlight. Everything gleamed with the kind of perfection that came from unlimited resources and professional maintenance. A woman appeared from a side corridor, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. She was probably in her 60s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of bearing that suggested she'd seen everything at least twice. "Mr. Costa," she said, her accent distinctly Italian. "I wasn't expecting guests." "Neither was I, Maria." Lorenzo's hand found the small of my back, guiding me forward with gentle pressure. "This is Aurora Hayes. She'll be staying with us for a while." Maria's gaze swept over me, taking in my damp scrubs, my exhausted appearance, the way I clutched my purse like a lifeline. If she was surprised by my presence, she didn't show it. "Of course, sir. Shall I prepare the blue suite?" "Yes. And have the kitchen send up dinner. Something light." I wanted to protest, to insist that I wouldn't be staying anywhere, but the words died in my throat when I saw the way both of them simply assumed my compliance, as if my opinion on the matter was irrelevant. "Follow me," Maria said, already turning toward a sweeping staircase. "Actually," Lorenzo caught my arm gently but firmly. "First, we talk. Maria, give us 30 minutes. She nodded and disappeared as silently as she'd appeared, leaving me alone with Lorenzo in his palatial foyer. He led me through a doorway into what looked like a study, all dark wood and leather furniture arranged around a fireplace that could have roasted an entire pig. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair that probably cost more than my car. I remained standing. "I want to call my brother. He'll be worried when I don't come home. Your phone is dead." "Then let me use yours." Lorenzo poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter, amber liquid catching the firelight like liquid gold. "What will you tell him? That you're safe but can't come home because criminals are hunting you? That you're staying with a man you met 30 minutes ago?" Put that way, it did sound insane. "I'll think of something. Ethan Hayes, 17 years old, senior at Lincoln High, wants to study engineering at State." Lorenzo took a sip of his drink, watching me over the rim. "Soccer team, honor roll, works weekends at the sporting goods store to help with expenses." My blood turned to ice. "How do you know about Ethan?" "I told you. I make it my business to know things." He set down his glass and moved to a desk in the corner, withdrawing a manila folder. "Aurora Catherine Hayes, 26 years old. Parents died in a house fire when you were 19. Raised your brother alone while putting yourself through nursing school. Works double shifts at Mercy General. Volunteers at the children's clinic on weekends." He tossed the folder onto the coffee table between us. "Lives in a 2-bedroom apartment on Maple Street. Drives a Honda with 90,000 miles on it. Hasn't been on a date in 8 months." I stared at the folder, horrified by what it represented. "You investigated me. The moment you got into my car, you became my responsibility. I don't take on responsibilities without knowing exactly what I'm dealing with. I'm not your responsibility. I'm not anything to you." Lorenzo's dark eyes studied me with unnerving intensity. "That's where you're wrong, Aurora. The moment Viktor Kozlov's men started hunting you, you became part of my world. And in my world, information is the difference between living and dying. Viktor Kozlov, the man whose people were looking for Elena tonight. He runs the Russian operations in this city, and he's not known for his patience or mercy. Lorenzo moved closer, and I caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made my pulse quicken despite my fear. Elena Vasquez stole medical supplies from his operations. Prescription drugs, surgical equipment, things that could be sold on the black market for considerable profit. Elena wouldn't do that. She's a good person. Good people do desperate things when they're in debt to the wrong people. His voice was matter of fact, neither condemning nor sympathetic. Elena borrowed money from Kozlov's loan sharks to pay her mother's medical bills. When she couldn't pay it back, she agreed to use her access at the hospital to steal for them. The room seemed to tilt around me. You're saying Elena is a criminal. I'm saying Elena is a dead woman if Kozlov finds her first. The bluntness of his words hit me like a physical blow. And you think I know where she is? I think Kozlov believes you might. And in his line of work, belief is enough. Lorenzo returned to his chair, moving with the fluid grace of a predator who knew he held all the advantages. Tell me, when was the last time you saw Elena? I thought back, trying to remember. 3 weeks ago, maybe 4. She asked me to cover one of her shifts, said she had a family emergency. Did she seem nervous? Frightened? She seemed different, paranoid. She kept looking over her shoulder, jumping at every sound. The memory was clearer now. Elena's wide eyes and shaking hands. I asked if she was okay, but she said everything was fine. Everything was not fine. Lorenzo leaned forward, elbows on his knees. 3 days ago, Elena missed a scheduled delivery to Kozlov's people. Yesterday, she disappeared from her apartment, leaving behind everything except the merchandise she was supposed to deliver. What kind of merchandise? The kind that Kozlov paid for in advance. The kind that he'll kill to recover. I sank into the chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. This is insane. I'm a pediatric nurse. I take care of sick children. I don't know anything about criminals or stolen merchandise or any of this, but Kozlov doesn't know that. Lorenzo's voice was gentle now, almost sympathetic. All he knows is that Elena Vasquez had your work schedule, your shift patterns, your personal information. He thinks you were her partner. That's ridiculous. Is it? You covered her shifts. You had access to the same supplies she was stealing. You matched the physical description his people have been given. Lorenzo stood and moved to a window overlooking the dark grounds. From his perspective, you're either Elena's accomplice or you know where she's hiding. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to process the nightmare my life had become in the span of a few hours. So what happens now? Do you turn me over to him? Lorenzo was silent for so long that I looked up to find him watching me with an expression I couldn't read. The Costa family and the Kozlov organization have a complicated relationship. Sometimes we're allies, sometimes we're competitors. Always we respect each other's territory. That doesn't answer my question. No, he said quietly. I don't turn you over to him. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by suspicion. Why? Because Viktor Kozlov is a blunt instrument who solves problems with violence. He'll torture you for information you don't have, then kill you when you can't provide it. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. I prefer more elegant solutions, such as, you stay here, under my protection, until we locate Elena and recover what she stole. Once Kozlov has his merchandise back, his interest in you disappears. It sounded reasonable, logical even. But there was something in Lorenzo's tone, something in the way his dark eyes lingered on me, that suggested his motives weren't entirely altruistic. And if Elena is already dead, then we find the merchandise anyway. He moved back to the desk, pressing a button that summoned Maria almost instantly. Show Miss Hayes to her room. Make sure she has everything she needs. I stood on unsteady legs. How long will this take? Lorenzo's smile was sharp as a blade. As long as necessary. You're under my protection now, Aurora Hayes, whether you want to be or not. The blue suite was larger than my entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of manicured gardens disappearing into the darkness. Rain still lashed against the glass. But here, 3 stories up and surrounded by luxury I'd never imagined, the storm felt distant and manageable. I stood in the center of the room, still wearing my damp scrubs, trying to process the surreal turn my life had taken. 12 hours ago, My biggest worry had been whether I could pick up an extra shift to help pay for Ethan's college applications. Now I was a prisoner in a mansion, protected by a man who spoke of violence and territory as casually as other people discussed the weather. A soft knock interrupted my spiraling thoughts. Maria entered carrying a silver tray, laden with covered dishes that smelled like heaven. "Mr. Costa thought you might be hungry," she said, setting the tray on a small table near the windows. "There are clothes in the wardrobe, all in your size." I stared at her. How does he know my size? Maria's expression gave nothing away. Mr. Costa is very thorough. The understatement of the century. I lifted one of the silver covers, revealing pasta in a cream sauce that made my stomach growl despite my circumstances. When had I last eaten? Before my shift started, probably. A granola bar scarfed down between patients. "Maria," I called as she reached the door. "How long have you worked for him?" She paused, considering her words carefully. 15 years. Since before his father died. What kind of man is he? For the first time, her composed mask slipped slightly. The kind who protects what's his. "Eat, Miss Hayes. You'll need your strength." After she left, I explored the wardrobe she'd mentioned. Inside hung clothes that still had tags, all in my exact size, all in colors that would complement my complexion. Jeans, sweaters, dresses, even lingerie that made me blush. Everything perfectly chosen, as if someone had studied not just my measurements, but my preferences. The thought made my skin crawl. I forced myself to eat the pasta, partly because I was starving, and partly because I suspected I'd need energy for whatever came next. The food was incredible, the kind of meal I'd only experienced at expensive restaurants on the rare occasions I could afford them. When I'd finished, exhaustion hit me like a wave. The shower was larger than most bathrooms, with water pressure that felt like heaven against my aching muscles. I found silk pajamas laid out on the bed, probably worth more than I made in a month. Sleep should have been impossible. I was in a stranger's house, surrounded by armed men, with criminals hunting me through the city. But my body had reached its limit. I fell into the plush bed and was unconscious within minutes. I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of voices drifting up from the gardens below. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then reality crashed down like cold water. A knock at the door announced Maria's arrival with coffee and what looked like a breakfast fit for royalty. Fresh fruit, pastries that belonged in a bakery window, eggs prepared with herbs I couldn't identify. "Mr. Costa requests your presence in his study at 10, Maria informed me. "He has information about your friend, Elena." I'd almost forgotten why I was here in my fear and confusion. Almost forgotten that somewhere out there, my former classmate was running for her life. I dressed in jeans and a cashmere sweater that felt like a cloud against my skin, then made my way downstairs through corridors lined with artwork that belonged in museums. The study looked different in daylight, less ominous, but somehow more impressive. Lorenzo stood behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Italian to someone who was clearly receiving orders rather than giving them. He ended the call when he saw me and gestured to the same chair I'd occupied the night before. "You slept well?" "Well enough." I settled into the leather chair, hyper-aware of how he watched my every movement. "Maria said you have news about Elena." "I do." Lorenzo moved to the front of his desk, leaning against it with casual grace. "My people located her apartment. She left in a hurry, but not before someone else paid her a visit." "Kozlov's people?" "No. Someone else entirely." He picked up a photograph from his desk, studying it before passing it to me. "Someone who was looking for the same thing Kozlov wants." The photograph showed Elena's apartment in shambles. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled out, papers scattered across the floor. It looked like a tornado had swept through the small space. Who else would want what she stole? Lorenzo's expression darkened. "That's what we need to find out. The medical supplies Elena took aren't just valuable to street dealers. Certain pharmaceuticals, surgical equipment. They have value to other organizations as well." "What kind of organizations?" "The kind that run underground medical operations. Black market surgeries, illegal procedures." He took the photograph back, his fingers brushing mine briefly. the kind that might pay even more than Kozlov would. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through me. I pulled my hand back quickly, but not before I saw something flicker in Lorenzo's dark eyes. So Elena might have found another buyer. Elena might be dead already. Lorenzo's bluntness was becoming familiar, though no less jarring. But the merchandise is still out there, and now we have multiple parties hunting for it. I stood abruptly, needing distance from his overwhelming presence. I should call Ethan. He'll be worried. You can't. What do you mean I can't? Lorenzo pressed a button on his desk, and immediately a monitor descended from the ceiling, flickering to life with security footage. This is your apartment building from this morning. The screen showed my street, but it looked wrong. Too many parked cars. Too many men in dark clothing lounging on corners with the studied casualness of surveillance. Kozlov's people? I whispered. Some of them. Others belonged to the organization that tore apart Elena's apartment. Lorenzo changed the feed, showing the interior of my building's lobby. They're waiting for you to come home. My legs felt weak. What about Ethan? Is he safe? My people have been watching him since dawn. He's at school, unaware of the danger. He'll remain safe as long as he stays in public places. The casual way he mentioned having Ethan under surveillance should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a strange sense of relief. Whatever else Lorenzo was, he seemed to keep his promises about protection. How long can this last? I can't stay here forever. You can stay here as long as necessary. Lorenzo moved closer, and I caught the scent of his cologne again, that intoxicating mixture of cedar and danger. Unless you'd prefer to take your chances with Kozlov. That's not a real choice. No, it's not. His dark eyes held mine, and I felt something shift in the air between us. But there are compensations to staying under my protection, such as safety, comfort, the resources of the Costa family at your disposal. He reached out, his fingers barely brushing my cheek, and my personal attention. I should have stepped back, should have slapped his hand away, reminded him that I was there under duress, not by choice. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, my skin tingling where he made contact. This is insane, I breathed. Yes, it is. Lorenzo's voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. I've never brought a woman to this house, never offered protection to someone who wasn't family. Then why me? His thumb traced my jawline with exquisite gentleness. Because when I saw you in that car, terrified but still fighting, something inside me recognized something inside you. Before I could ask what he meant, his phone rang, shattering the moment. Lorenzo stepped back, his professional mask sliding into place as he answered. What? His voice was sharp, all traces of gentleness gone. When? A pause. No, don't move until I get there. He ended the call and moved to a safe hidden behind a painting, withdrawing a gun that he tucked into a shoulder holster with practiced ease. What's happening? Elena's been found. Lorenzo shrugged into a jacket that concealed his weapon. She's alive, but barely. Where is she? St. Mary's Hospital. Intensive care. Lorenzo paused at the door, his dark eyes unreadable. Someone tortured her, Aurora. Badly. But she's conscious, and she's asking for you. My blood ran cold. She's asking for me specifically? By name? Lorenzo's expression was grim, which means she has something to tell you, something worth almost dying for. The weight of his words settled over me like a shroud. Elena was alive, but at what cost? And what could she possibly need to tell me that was worth enduring torture? We leave in 10 minutes, Lorenzo said. And Aurora? Whatever Elena tells you, remember that your life might depend on it. The drive to St. Mary's Hospital felt like traveling through a war zone. Lorenzo's men had formed a convoy around us, 3 black SUVs that moved with military precision through the morning traffic. I sat in the back of the Maserati, watching the city pass by through bulletproof glass, trying to prepare myself for what I might find when we reached Elena. Tell me about her, Lorenzo said, his eyes never leaving the road. Elena Vasquez. How well did you know her? We went through nursing school together. She was brilliant, top of our class in pharmacology. I twisted my hands in my lap, remembering the bright-eyed girl who had dreamed of working in pediatric oncology. She wanted to help children with cancer, said she'd lost her father to it when she was 12. People with noble intentions often make the worst criminals. They justify anything in service of a greater good. His cynicism stung because part of me feared he might be right. Elena isn't a criminal. She's desperate. Desperation makes people dangerous, Aurora. Remember that. We pulled into the hospital's underground parking garage, the same type of concrete maze where my nightmare had begun. But this time, I was surrounded by protection instead of running from threats. Lorenzo's men positioned themselves at strategic points while he escorted me to a private elevator. "How do you have access to all this?" I asked as we rose toward the ICU. The Costa family has interests in many legitimate businesses, including healthcare. Lorenzo's smile was sharp. "It's amazing what you can accomplish when you own the right shares in the right companies." The ICU looked like any other I'd worked in, but the tension in the air was palpable. Doctors and nurses moved with the heightened alertness of people who knew something dangerous was happening in their hospital. Several men in suits stood at various points throughout the unit, trying to look like concerned relatives but fooling no one. "Yours or theirs?" I whispered, nodding toward the obvious security. "Both. Kozlov wants to know what Elena tells us just as badly as we do." A doctor approached, middle-aged with tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Costa? I'm Dr. Richards. The patient is stable but critical. She's been asking for Aurora Hayes specifically." "That's me," I said, stepping forward. Dr. Richards looked between Lorenzo and me, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "She's been heavily sedated for the pain, but she's lucid. Whatever happened to her, she fought hard to stay alive." He led us to a private room at the end of the corridor. Through the window, I could see a figure so battered and broken that I almost didn't recognize her as Elena. Bandages covered most of her visible skin, and machines beeped steadily around her bed. 5 minutes, Dr. Richards said, "and I need to ask that you keep your voices down." Lorenzo placed his hand on my shoulder, a gesture that should have felt possessive, but somehow felt comforting instead. "I'll wait outside." The room smelled of antiseptic and suffering. Elena's eyes were closed when I entered, but they opened at the sound of my footsteps. When she saw me, tears began streaming down her bruised cheeks. "Aurora." Her voice was barely a whisper, distorted by the breathing tube that had been removed only hours earlier. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I pulled a chair close to her bed, taking her hand gently in mine. Her fingers were cold, fragile as bird bones. "Don't talk. Just rest." "No." Elena struggled to sit up, wincing with the effort. "I have to tell you. They're looking for you. They think you know." "Know what, Elena? What did you steal?" "Not medical supplies." Elena's grip tightened on my hand with surprising strength. "That was just cover. What I really took was information. Files. About the Petrov family." The name hit me like ice water. "The Petrovs? Your father worked for them, before he died." Elena's eyes were wide with desperation. "Aurora, your father didn't die in an accident. He was killed because he tried to get out, tried to take his files and disappear." The room tilted around me. "You're lying. The files I stole, they're about money laundering operations going back 15 years. Your father's name is all over them. Account numbers, transaction records, everything." Elena coughed, specks of blood appearing on her lips. "Viktor Kozlov wants them because they prove the Petrovs have been stealing from him for years. But Lorenzo Costa wants them too." "Why would Lorenzo care about files on the Petrovs?" Elena's eyes met mine with heartbreaking clarity. "Because the Costa family was hired to kill your father. Lorenzo's father gave the order personally." The words hit me like physical blows. My father, dead for 7 years, killed by the family of the man who was now claiming to protect me. The man whose touch made my pulse race, whose dark eyes held secrets I was only beginning to understand. "Where are the files, Elena?" "Hidden. Somewhere safe." Elena's breathing was becoming more labored. "But Aurora, there's more. The reason they want you isn't just about the files. It's about what's in them." "What do you mean?" "Your father didn't just launder money for the Petrovs. He skimmed millions of dollars over the years, moved it into accounts they never found." Elena's grip on my hand was weakening. "Those accounts are in your name now. You're the heir to a fortune built on blood money." The machines around Elena's bed began beeping more frantically. Nurses rushed into the room, pushing me aside as they worked to stabilize her. I stood frozen in the corner, Elena's revelations echoing in my mind like gunshots. Your father was killed. Lorenzo's family gave the order. You're heir to blood money. Strong hands gripped my shoulders, pulling me from the room. Lorenzo's face was grim as he guided me toward the elevator, but I could see questions in his dark eyes. What did she tell you? I stared at him, seeing him with new eyes. Not the dangerous but protective man who had saved me from Viktor Kozlov's hunters, but the son of the man who had ordered my father's execution. She told me enough. The elevator doors closed, sealing us in the small space together. Lorenzo studied my face with that unnerving intensity of his, and I knew he could see that everything had changed. Aurora, whatever Elena said, you need to understand that the past is complicated. There are things you don't know, circumstances that... Did your family kill my father? The question hung between us like a blade. Lorenzo's jaw tightened, and for a moment, I saw past his carefully constructed mask to something raw and almost vulnerable beneath. Yes, the simple admission shattered something inside me. I pressed myself against the elevator wall, as far from him as the small space allowed. And you knew, when you investigated me, when you brought me to your house, you knew exactly who I was. Aurora. You knew my father worked for the Petrovs. You knew he was killed. You knew I was connected to all this. And you let me believe it was just bad luck that got me involved. The elevator opened on the parking level, but neither of us moved. Lorenzo's dark eyes were fixed on mine, and I could see the calculation behind them, the weighing of options and outcomes that seemed to drive every decision he made. I knew some of it, he said finally, but not all. Not about the files Elena stole, or the accounts, or the real reason Kozlov wants you dead. The real reason? He doesn't just think you know where Elena hid the Petrov files. He thinks you have access to the money your father stole. Lorenzo stepped closer, and I caught the familiar scent of his cologne, now tinged with something darker. $47 million, Aurora. That's what your father accumulated over the years. That's what's sitting in accounts with your name on them. The number was so large it seemed abstract, meaningless. I don't want it. It doesn't matter what you want. Kozlov believes you have it, which means he'll never stop hunting you. Lorenzo's hand found my face, his thumb tracing my cheekbone with the same gentleness he'd shown that morning. The only way you survive this is with my protection. I pulled away from his touch, the gesture feeling like betrayal now instead of comfort. Protection from the son of the man who killed my father. Protection from everyone else who wants you dead. Lorenzo's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Yes, my family killed your father. Yes, I knew who you were before I brought you home. But Aurora, I'm the only thing standing between you and a war that will destroy everything you care about. The truth of his words settled over me like a weight. Outside this elevator, Kozlov's men were hunting me. The Petrovs wanted their stolen files back. And somewhere in the city, $47 million sat in accounts that painted a target on my back the size of a skyscraper. I need time to think. Time is the one thing we don't have. Lorenzo's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at it, his expression darkening further. Elena just died. And Dr. Richards is telling anyone who'll listen that she was conscious long enough to talk to you. The elevator suddenly felt like a trap. Meaning everyone knows you have information now. Whatever Elena told you, whatever secrets she shared, you're no longer just a person of interest. Lorenzo's dark eyes met mine with grim certainty. You're the key to everything. And that makes you the most dangerous woman in the city. The ride back to the mansion passed in suffocating silence. I stared out the bulletproof windows at a city that had become foreign to me in the span of 48 hours. Every shadow potentially hiding someone who wanted me dead. The revelation about my father's murder sat like poison in my chest, burning through everything I thought I knew about my life. Lorenzo kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, his dark eyes unreadable. I could feel him calculating, weighing options, probably deciding whether I was still useful or had become too dangerous to keep alive. The man who had touched my face with such gentleness was gone, replaced by the cold strategist who could order deaths without blinking. When we reached the estate, I didn't wait for him to open my door. I was out of the car and striding toward the mansion before his men could form their protective circle around us. I heard his footsteps behind me, quick and purposeful. But I didn't turn around. Aurora, we need to talk. No, we don't. I pushed through the front doors, Maria appearing instantly as if she'd been watching for our return. I need to call my brother. I need to get him somewhere safe. Ethan is already safe. My people are... I whirled around to face him, fury overriding my fear. Your people? The same people who killed my father? The same family that's been lying to me since the moment I got in your car? Lorenzo dismissed Maria with a sharp gesture, waiting until we were alone in the foyer before responding. You want the truth? Fine. Yes, my father ordered your father's death. Yes, I knew who you were when I brought you here. But Aurora, you have no idea what your father was involved in. He was trying to get out. Elena said he wanted to disappear, to take his files and run. Your family murdered him for that. My family murdered him because he was planning to sell those files to the FBI. Lorenzo's voice was ice cold now, all pretense of gentleness gone. He wasn't trying to disappear. He was trying to destroy everyone he'd worked with, including innocent people who had nothing to do with his crimes. The words hit me like a slap. You're lying. I'm telling you what my father told me when I was 18 years old. What he told me to justify why he'd ordered the execution of a man with 2 young children. Lorenzo moved closer, his presence overwhelming. Do you think I enjoyed learning that my family was responsible for making you and Ethan orphans? I backed away from him, needing space to think. I don't know what to believe anymore. Believe this. Lorenzo reached into his jacket and I tensed, but he withdrew a manila folder instead of a weapon. Elena wasn't the only one who had access to those files. I've been looking for them for 2 years. He tossed the folder onto a side table, and photographs scattered across the surface. Banking records, transaction logs, pages of financial data that meant nothing to me, but clearly meant everything to him. Your father didn't just launder money, Aurora. He created a financial network that spans 3 countries and involves dozens of legitimate businesses. He was the architect of a system that's still being used today. I stared at the documents, trying to process what I was seeing. What are you saying? I'm saying that $47 million is just the beginning. The accounts in your name are the key to a financial empire worth over $200 million. Lorenzo's dark eyes were intense, almost feverish. Your father didn't steal from the Petrovs. He created a parallel banking system and used their money to fund it. That's impossible. Is it? How do you think a man who worked as a mid-level accountant could afford to send his daughter to private school, could pay for medical bills when your mother got sick, could leave you enough insurance money to put yourself through college? The questions hit like physical blows, because I'd never thought about them before. Never questioned where the money had come from, too grateful to have it to examine its source. The insurance money was legitimate. The insurance money was a fraction of what your father left you. The rest has been sitting in accounts he created, earning interest, waiting for you to claim it. Lorenzo picked up one of the photographs, a bank statement with my name at the top. Happy 27th birthday, Aurora. Your inheritance just matured. My legs felt weak. I sank into a chair that probably cost more than my car, staring at numbers that seemed too large to be real. Why are you telling me this? Because Marco Santos, my most trusted lieutenant, has been feeding information to Viktor Kozlov for the past 6 months. Lorenzo's voice was deadly quiet. Because Elena didn't just randomly stumble across those files. Someone led her to them. Someone who knew exactly what they contained. Marco has a 12-year-old daughter with leukemia. The treatments aren't covered by insurance, and he was desperate. Lorenzo's expression was carved from stone. Kozlov offered him enough money to save his child's life in exchange for inside information about my operations. I felt sick. And you think Marco told Elena about the files? I think Marco has been setting up the perfect storm for months. Elena steals the files, making it look like a random crime. Kozlov gets the evidence he needs to destroy the Petrovs. And I get blamed for letting it happen under my nose. What about me? Where do I fit in? Lorenzo's smile was sharp as a blade. You, my dear Aurora, are the wild card nobody expected. Marco couldn't have known that Elena would involve you. Couldn't have predicted that you'd end up under my protection. His dark eyes met mine, and he definitely couldn't have predicted that I'd want to keep you here. The admission hung between us like a challenge. I stood abruptly, needing to move, to think. to escape the suffocating weight of revelations that kept reshaping everything I thought I knew. I need some air. Aurora, I need some air. I repeated the words with as much authority as I could muster. Alone. Lorenzo studied me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing the risks of letting me out of his sight. Finally, he nodded toward the French doors that led to the gardens. The grounds are secure. My men are positioned throughout the perimeter. But don't go beyond the rose garden. I walked outside into afternoon sunlight that felt like a mockery of the darkness swirling in my chest. The gardens were beautiful, perfectly manicured expanses of green, broken by strategically placed flowers that probably cost more to maintain than most people's salaries. I followed a stone path toward what looked like a gazebo, needing somewhere private to process everything I'd learned. My father, the man I'd idolized, had been a criminal. The money that had paid for my education, for my mother's medical care, for the insurance that had kept Ethan and me afloat after our parents died. All of it was blood money. And Lorenzo, the dangerous man whose touch made my pulse race, was the son of my father's killer. The gazebo offered a view of the entire estate, and I could see why Lorenzo felt confident about security. Men in dark suits were positioned at intervals throughout the grounds, some obvious, others trying to blend into the landscape. It was a beautiful prison, but it was still a prison. I was so lost in thought that I almost missed the movement in the trees beyond the rose garden. A flash of dark clothing, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. But the men Lorenzo had stationed as guards were wearing lighter colors, and they were supposed to be closer to the house. My blood turned cold as I realized what I was seeing. Someone had breached the perimeter. I stood frozen, unsure whether to run toward the house or try to hide. The decision was made for me when a hand clamped over my mouth from behind, strong arms pinning me against a body that smelled of cigarettes and violence. "Don't scream," a voice whispered in accented English. "Viktor Kozlov wants to have a conversation with you." More men emerged from the trees, moving with the practiced stealth of professional soldiers. They wore black tactical gear and carried weapons that looked like they belonged on a battlefield, not in a garden. I tried to struggle, but the man holding me was too strong. A cloth pressed against my face, and the world began to blur at the edges. The last thing I saw before consciousness faded was the beautiful mansion where I'd felt almost safe, growing smaller and more distant as they carried me into the darkness of the forest. When I woke, I was in what looked like an abandoned warehouse, tied to a chair in the center of a circle of harsh lights. My head pounded, and my mouth felt like cotton. But I was alive, for now. A man stepped into the light, and I knew immediately that I was looking at Viktor Kozlov. He was smaller than I'd expected, with silver hair and pale eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. He wore an expensive suit, but his hands were stained with what looked like motor oil, or blood. "Aurora Hayes," he said, his accent thick with Russian consonants. "The famous nurse who has caused me so much trouble." I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. Kozlov noticed and gestured to one of his men, who brought me a glass of water. I drank gratefully, buying time to think. "I don't have what you want," I said when I could finally speak. "But you know where it is." Kozlov moved closer, and I could smell his cologne, something expensive that couldn't quite cover the underlying scent of violence. "Elena Vasquez told you before she died. My sources at the hospital confirmed it. She told me about my father, about files, but I don't know where they are. Perhaps. But you have something else I need." Kozlov smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen. "Access to accounts your father created. Money that belongs to me. I don't have access to anything." "You will." Kozlov nodded to someone behind me. "After we have our conversation with your young brother." My blood turned to ice. Ethan, beautiful boy, 17 years old, dreams of being an engineer. Kozlov's smile widened. "He's being collected as we speak. I'm told he's quite gifted at mathematics. Perhaps he inherited his father's talent with numbers. If you hurt him..." "I won't hurt him if you cooperate." Kozlov pulled up a chair, sitting close enough that I could see the coldness in his pale eyes. "You're going to tell me everything Elena said. Then you're going to help me access those accounts. And if you're very cooperative, both you and Ethan will survive this experience." The warehouse door opened with a screech of metal, and my heart sank as I saw two men dragging someone between them. But it wasn't Ethan. It was Marco Santos, bloodied and beaten, his expensive suit torn and dirty. "Your boyfriend's lieutenant has been most informative," Kozlov said, standing. "He's told me all about Lorenzo Costa's weaknesses, including his newest one." He looked at me with that terrible smile. "You." The hours that followed blurred together in a haze of fear and pain. Viktor Kozlov was patient in the way only truly dangerous men could be patient. He didn't torture me, not physically. Instead, he showed me photographs of Ethan walking to school, sitting in classes, completely unaware that his life hung by a thread. "Your brother is very studious," Kozlov observed, flipping through images that made my blood run cold. "He stops at the same coffee shop every morning at 7:15, orders the same drink. Very predictable habits." "Please," I whispered, the words scraping against my throat. "He's just a kid. He doesn't know anything about any of this." "But you do." Kozlov set the photographs aside and leaned back in his chair. "Elena Vasquez told you something before she died. Something important enough. That Lorenzo Costa's people have been tearing the city apart looking for you." Marco Santos hung from chains in the corner, barely conscious. Every few minutes, Kozlov's men would splash water on his face to keep him awake, ensuring he could witness what was happening, what would happen to me if I didn't cooperate. "I told you everything Elena said. About the files. About my father. About the money in accounts I can't even access." "Ah, but that's not entirely true, is it?" Kozlov smiled, and I felt ice form in my veins. "Marco here has been most informative about Lorenzo's recent activities. Did you know that your lover has been moving substantial sums of money in the past 2 days?" I stared at Kozlov, not understanding. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Lorenzo Costa has gained access to your father's financial network. Those accounts you claim you can't reach. He's been draining them systematically since the night he brought you to his home." The words hit me like physical blows. "That's impossible." "Is it? How do you think he knew so much about your father's operations? How do you think he was able to show you those banking records?" Kozlov's pale eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction. "Lorenzo Costa has been using you as the key to unlock your own inheritance. He wouldn't." "Wouldn't he?" "Marco, tell the lovely Aurora what Lorenzo said when you asked about her safety." Marco's head lifted painfully, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "He said..." Marco's voice was barely audible. "He said she was useful until the transfers were complete. After that, she becomes a liability." Kozlov finished. "Just like Elena. Just like you will be, Marco, once this is over." I felt something break inside me. Not just my heart, but something deeper. The man who had touched my face with such gentleness, who had made me feel protected for the first time in years, had been using me from the beginning. Not just for information about Elena, but as a living, breathing key to my father's hidden fortune. "The files Elena stole," I said, my voice hollow. "Where are they really? That's what we're going to find out." Kozlov stood, straightening his suit jacket. "Because Lorenzo Costa is coming for you, my dear. And when he arrives, you're going to help us convince him to return what he's stolen. Why would he come? If he has what he wants from me, because Marco was right about one thing. You've become Lorenzo's weakness." Kozlov's smile was predatory. "Did you know that he executed 3 of his own men for failing to protect you? That he's mobilized every resource at his disposal to find you?" I wanted to feel hope at his words. But Kozlov's next revelation crushed it before it could form. Of course, he's also been systematically emptying those accounts while he searches. By my calculations, he's transferred over $30 million in the past 6 hours. Kozlov checked his expensive watch. "At this rate, your inheritance will be gone by midnight." The warehouse door exploded inward with a sound like thunder. Armed men poured through the opening, moving with military precision. I heard gunfire, shouts in multiple languages, the controlled chaos of a professional assault. Through the smoke and confusion, I saw him. Lorenzo Costa, moving like death incarnate through Kozlov's men. He wore all black, a gun in each hand, his dark eyes scanning the warehouse until they found mine. The relief I felt was so intense it was painful. Whatever he had done, whatever he had taken, Seeing him alive and fighting to reach me made every betrayal seem secondary to survival. "Behind the containers," Kozlov barked to his remaining men as he retreated deeper into the warehouse. "Take the girl." Rough hands grabbed me, chair and all, dragging me into the maze of shipping containers that filled the back half of the building. I could hear the gunfight continuing, could smell cordite and blood, but I couldn't see what was happening. "Lorenzo!" I screamed his name, hoping he would hear me over the chaos. Very touching. Kozlov appeared beside me, his pale eyes reflecting the overhead lights like a predator's. "Your lover is quite devoted. It's almost a shame that we'll have to kill him." "The files," I said desperately. "I know where Elena hid them." Kozlov paused, studying my face for signs of deception. "You're lying. She told me before she died, but I was too shocked by everything else to process it properly. The lie came easily, driven by desperation and the need to buy time. She said they were somewhere safe, somewhere no one would think to look. Where? Let me talk to Lorenzo. Let him know I'm alive. I'll make him tell you where he's moved the money, and I'll tell you where the files are." Kozlov considered this, and I could see the calculation behind his pale eyes. "You would betray him? After he came here to rescue you?" "He betrayed me first." The words tasted like poison, but they weren't entirely false. "He stole my inheritance, used me as a key to my own father's accounts. Why should I protect him?" "An interesting proposition." Kozlov nodded to one of his men. "Bring Costa here. Alive. Tell him we want to negotiate." The gunfire gradually decreased, then stopped altogether. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own heartbeat, fast and irregular, with fear and adrenaline. When Lorenzo appeared, flanked by Kozlov's men but still moving with that controlled grace, I saw something in his dark eyes that I'd never seen before. Fear, not for himself, but for me. "Are you hurt?" His first words were to me, not to Kozlov, not about the situation we were in. "I'm alive." "That can change very quickly," Kozlov interrupted. "Sit down, Mr. Costa. We have business to discuss." Lorenzo remained standing, his eyes never leaving mine. "What do you want?" $47 million. The money you've been stealing from accounts that belong to Miss Hayes." Kozlov moved to stand behind my chair, his hands resting on my shoulders in a mockery of protection. "Transfer it back, and we can discuss terms for her release." "I haven't stolen anything," Lorenzo said, his voice deadly quiet. "Every transfer was authorized by Aurora herself." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "The power of attorney documents you signed when we brought you to the hospital." The forms Maria witnessed. Lorenzo's dark eyes held mine. "They gave me legal authority to access your accounts in case something happened to you." The memory came flooding back. Papers shoved at me while I was still reeling from Elena's revelations. Maria's reassuring presence as I signed document after document without reading them. I'd been so focused on Elena's story, so overwhelmed by learning about my father's death, that I'd signed anything put in front of me. I didn't know what I was signing. "I know." Lorenzo's voice was gentle now, almost apologetic. "But I needed to move the money before Kozlov or the Petrovs could access it. It's safe, Aurora. Hidden where no one can touch it until this is over. How very convenient." Kozlov's grip on my shoulders tightened. "But I'm afraid safe isn't good enough. I want it transferred to accounts I control, now. That's not going to happen. Then Miss Hayes dies, and you get to live with the knowledge that your greed killed the woman you claim to care about." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see Lorenzo calculating odds, weighing options, trying to find a way out of an impossible situation. "There's another option," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "The files Elena stole. I know where they are." Both men looked at me, Kozlov with suspicion, Lorenzo with something that might have been pride. "Those files contain evidence that will destroy the Petrov organization completely," I continued. "Bank records, transaction logs, everything you need to eliminate your biggest rivals. Surely that's worth more than money. Where are they?" I met Lorenzo's eyes, hoping he would understand what I was really saying. "Elena told me she hid them somewhere no one would think to look. Somewhere safe." Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but I saw the slight nod that told me he understood. "The hospital," he said quietly. "She hid them at Mercy General." Kozlov's hands left my shoulders as he moved to face Lorenzo directly. "You're certain? It's the only place that makes sense." Elena had access. She knew the building. And who would think to look for stolen criminal files in a pediatric ward? "Then we're going to take a field trip," Kozlov decided. "All of us. Together." As Kozlov's men began preparing to move us, I caught Lorenzo's eye one more time. In that look, I saw a promise. Whatever happened next, whatever the cost, he would find a way to end this, even if it meant destroying us both in the process. The convoy that pulled up to Mercy General looked like a presidential motorcade, if presidents traveled with enough firepower to level city blocks. 3 black SUVs formed the core, with Lorenzo's men interspersed among Kozlov's forces in an uneasy alliance built on mutual greed and suspicion. I sat between Lorenzo and Kozlov in the middle vehicle, my hands zip-tied but otherwise unrestrained. The hospital where I'd worked for 3 years rose before us in the darkness, its windows glowing like beacons in the night. It looked different now. Not like a place of healing, but like a fortress I would have to breach. "Remember," Kozlov said as we approached the staff entrance, "you will act naturally. Get us inside, lead us to where Elena hid the files, and this ends quietly." "And if the files aren't where I think they are?" I asked. Kozlov's pale eyes reflected the dashboard lights. Then we moved to less pleasant methods of persuasion. Lorenzo hadn't spoken during the drive, but I could feel the tension radiating from him like heat. His dark eyes constantly scanned the streets, the shadows, looking for opportunities or threats. When he finally looked at me, I saw something that made my pulse quicken. He had a plan. The staff entrance was guarded by a single security officer, an older man named Jim, who'd been working nights at Mercy General since before I started. He looked up in surprise when he saw me approaching with a group of men in expensive suits. "Aurora, what are you doing here so late?" "Emergency case," I said, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Dr. Martinez called me in to assist with a pediatric trauma." Jim nodded, already reaching for his keycard. "Rough night in the ER. Go ahead up." I felt a moment of guilt for involving an innocent man in whatever was about to happen. But Kozlov's hand on my back reminded me that I didn't have a choice. The elevator ride to the pediatric ward was silent, except for the mechanical hum of the machinery. When the doors opened, I was hit by the familiar smell of antiseptic and the soft sounds of a hospital at night. It should have been comforting, but instead, it felt like entering a battlefield. "Where?" Kozlov asked quietly. I led them down the corridor toward the supply closets at the far end of the ward. It was the most logical place for Elena to have hidden something, a location she would have had legitimate access to without arousing suspicion. But as we walked, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The ward was too empty, too quiet, even for a night shift. Where were the nurses who should have been making rounds? The residents who practically lived in this place? Lorenzo noticed it too. His hand moved almost imperceptibly toward his concealed weapon, and I saw him catch the eye of one of his men, some silent communication passing between them. We reached the supply closet, and I used my keycard to open it. The small room was exactly as I remembered it, lined with shelves of medical supplies, linens, and equipment. If Elena had hidden files here, they weren't immediately obvious. "Start looking," Kozlov ordered his men. "Check every box, every shelf." As the Russians began their search, I moved closer to Lorenzo. "Something's wrong," I whispered. "I know." His response was barely audible. "The hospital's been evacuated. This is a setup." Before I could ask what he meant, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. In that hellish illumination, I saw Kozlov's men reaching for their weapons just as the real battle began. The attack came from multiple directions at once. Windows exploded inward as men in tactical gear rappelled down the side of the building. The stairwell doors burst open, disgorging more armed figures. The elevator dinged cheerfully as it opened to reveal a team that looked like they belonged on a battlefield, not in a hospital. "Down!" Lorenzo's hand found my shoulder, pushing me to the floor as gunfire erupted around us. The pediatric ward became a war zone in seconds. Kozlov's men tried to establish defensive positions behind gurneys and equipment carts, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The attacking force moved with precision that spoke of military training and superior intelligence about the building's layout. "Who are they?" I shouted over the chaos. "Petrov's people," Lorenzo answered, emptying his pistol into a group of attackers trying to flank us. "The third party in this little war. Of course. The Petrov family, the ones my father had supposedly stolen from, the ones whose files Elena had really taken. They wanted their property back, and they didn't care who they had to kill to get it." Kozlov was screaming orders in Russian, but his voice was nearly drowned out by the sound of automatic weapons fire. One of his men went down, then another, their blood pooling on the sterile hospital floor. "We need to move," Lorenzo said, reloading with practiced efficiency. "This position is indefensible. Where can we go?" "The surgery wing. Better cover, multiple exit routes." Lorenzo's dark eyes met mine in the red emergency lighting. "Can you run?" I nodded, though my legs felt like jelly. Lorenzo cut my zip tie restraints with a tactical knife that appeared in his hand like magic, then grabbed my wrist. "Stay close. Don't stop for anything." We broke from cover together, Lorenzo's men forming a protective circle around us as we ran through corridors that had once been familiar and safe. Behind us, I could hear Kozlov shouting, his voice getting fainter as we left him and his remaining men to face the Petrov assault alone. The surgical wing was darker, quieter, but no safer. As we reached the main operating theater, Lorenzo suddenly stopped, holding up a hand for silence. "Motion sensors," he whispered. "They know we're here." The doors at the far end of the corridor opened, and a figure stepped out of the shadows. I recognized him from photographs Lorenzo had shown me. Dmitry Petrov, heir to the family empire, a man known for his cruelty even by the standards of organized crime. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with the kind of aristocratic features that belonged in a boardroom rather than a gunfight. But his eyes held the cold calculation of a predator, and the men flanking him carried weapons that could turn the surgical suite into an abattoir. "Lorenzo Costa," Dmitry said, his accent cultured, educated. "You've led us quite a chase." "Dmitry." Lorenzo stepped slightly in front of me, a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "I wasn't expecting a family reunion. You have something that belongs to us. Files that were stolen from our operations." Dmitry's gaze shifted to me, and I felt like prey being evaluated by a hunter. "And you have the woman whose father cost us so much money. Her father is dead. Has been for 7 years. Yes. Killed by your father on our contract." Dmitry smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen. "But the sins of the father, as they say. The debt passes to the children." "What debt?" I found my voice, though it came out smaller than I intended. $47 million in direct theft. Another $150 million in lost revenue from the financial network he dismantled. Dmitry began walking toward us, his men spreading out to prevent any escape. "Your father didn't just steal from us, Miss Hayes. He destroyed a decade of careful planning. I don't have access to that money. But Lorenzo does, don't you?" Dmitry's smile widened. "My sources tell me you've been quite busy with Miss Hayes' inheritance. Moving funds, consolidating accounts. Very thorough work. The money is safe," Lorenzo said, "beyond the reach of anyone who might want to misuse it." "Misuse it?" Dmitry laughed, the sound echoing off the surgical suite's walls. "It was our money to begin with. We're simply collecting what's owed." The standoff stretched for long seconds, two predators evaluating each other while I stood caught between them. Then Dmitry made a gesture, and his men raised their weapons. "Kill Costa. Take the woman alive. We'll need her to access the accounts." Time slowed to a crawl. I saw Lorenzo begin to move, drawing his weapon with liquid grace. I saw the muzzle flashes from Dmitry's men, bright in the darkness. I saw the look of surprise on Dmitry's face when Lorenzo's first shot took him center mass. But what I remember most clearly is the moment when everything changed inside me. When one of Dmitry's men swung his rifle toward Lorenzo, when I saw the man I'd come to care about facing death, something primal and fierce awakened in my chest. Without thinking, without hesitation, I dove for the emergency case on the surgical suite wall. The fire axe was heavier than I'd expected, but adrenaline made it feel weightless. I swung it with all the strength in my body, catching Dimitri's gunman across the back of his neck, just as he pulled the trigger. The shot went wide. The man went down and didn't get up. And I stood there, covered in blood that wasn't mine, holding a weapon I'd never imagined myself capable of using, watching Dmitri Petrov bleed out on the floor of an operating room. Lorenzo's dark eyes found mine across the carnage. In them, I saw something new, not just desire or possession, but recognition. The acknowledgement that I was no longer the frightened nurse who had hidden in his car. I was something else now. Something dangerous. Something his. "The files," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "They were never at the hospital, were they?" Lorenzo shook his head, still watching me with that intense gaze. "Elena hid them somewhere else. Somewhere only you would think to look." "Where?" "Think, Aurora. Where would a nurse hide something she wanted to keep safe? Somewhere she went every day? Somewhere she felt protected?" The answer came to me like a revelation. "My locker. She hid them in my locker at the hospital." Lorenzo's smile was sharp as a blade. The one place Kozlov and the Petrovs would never think to search. The one place that belonged completely to you. Around us, the sounds of battle were fading. Kozlov's Russians, the Petrov soldiers, Lorenzo's men, they were all dead or dying. Only we remained standing in the red emergency lighting, surrounded by the consequences of a war that had started with my father's crimes and ended with my first kill. "What happens now?" I asked. Lorenzo moved closer, stepping over Dimitri's body without a glance. When he reached me, his hands framed my face with surprising gentleness. "Now we finish this," he said. "Together." 9 months later, I stood in the nursery of our penthouse overlooking the city, watching the morning sun paint the skyline in shades of gold and amber. The room was a masterpiece of luxury and security, bulletproof windows offering a panoramic view while concealing sensors and cameras that monitored every approach to our fortress in the sky. In the crib beside me, Julia Aurora Costa slept peacefully, her tiny fist curled around my finger. She had Lorenzo's dark hair but my green eyes, and when she looked at me, I saw a future that stretched beyond the violence that had brought us together. "She's perfect," Lorenzo said from the doorway, his voice soft with wonder that still surprised me after all these months. He approached with the careful quiet of a man who had learned that the most precious things in life were also the most fragile. "She has your stubborn streak already," I replied, not taking my eyes off our daughter. "The night nurse says she refuses to sleep unless she can see the door." Lorenzo's laugh was warm, genuine. "Smart girl. Never turn your back on an entrance." It was a lesson I'd learned well in the months following the hospital massacre. The Aurora Hayes who had hidden in a stranger's car during a storm no longer existed. In her place stood someone harder, sharper, someone who could smile at a charity gala while planning the destruction of a rival family's operations. The transformation had been gradual, but inexorable. Within weeks of Dmitri Petrov's death, I was attending strategy meetings in Lorenzo's study. Within months, I was running my own operations, using my medical background to establish a network of legitimate businesses that served as fronts for our expanding empire. "The Tokyo expansion is ahead of schedule," I said, shifting into the professional tone that had become second nature. "Dr. Yamamoto's surgical clinic is already showing returns, and the pharmaceutical imports are exceeding projections. And the Seoul connection? Secured." Elena's files provided exactly the leverage we needed with the Korean syndicate. I finally looked at him, seeing the pride in his dark eyes. "Your father's old contacts are proving surprisingly cooperative." The mention of his father no longer carried the weight it once had. In the months since we'd eliminated the Kozlov and Petrov threats, Lorenzo had shared more of his family's history. The violence, yes, but also the code that governed it. The protection of family above all else. The understanding that power came with responsibility. And I had proven myself worthy of both. "There's something else," Lorenzo said, moving to the window that looked out over our domain. "Intelligence suggests that the Bratva is considering a move into our territory. Let them come." The words came easily, backed by confidence earned through months of successful operations. "We have assets they don't know about, resources they can't match. Including you." I smiled, the expression feeling natural on lips that had once trembled with fear, especially me. Lorenzo's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. He read it, his expression shifting to something satisfied and predatory. "The Baltimore shipment?" I asked. "Intercepted by federal agents 30 minutes ago. The Morettis are going to have a very difficult conversation with their investors. And our involvement? Completely invisible. The tip came from an anonymous source concerned about drug trafficking near schools." Lorenzo's smile was sharp. Dr. Aurora Costa's civic-minded conscience, no doubt. Dr. Aurora Costa. The identity had been legally established 3 months ago, complete with medical credentials that would pass any scrutiny. On paper, I was a pediatric consultant who split my time between private practice and humanitarian work. In reality, I was the strategic mind behind the Costa family's expansion into legitimate medical businesses that generated both profit and influence. "Ethan called this morning," I said, adjusting Julia's blanket with practiced care. "His engineering program is going well. Dean's List again. He doesn't suspect anything. He thinks his mysterious scholarship came from a medical foundation I recommended him to. I traced my daughter's perfect features with one finger. He'll never need to know the truth about any of this." Protecting Ethan had been non-negotiable from the beginning. He lived in blissful ignorance of his sister's transformation, attending university on a full scholarship that appeared to come from legitimate sources. In his world, I was still the devoted sister who worked too hard to support them both. It was a fiction I maintained carefully, one of the many masks I wore to protect the people I loved. "Mrs. Costa?" Maria appeared in the doorway, her expression respectful but urgent. "Your guest has arrived." "Thank you, Maria. The blue study, as you requested." I handed Julia to Lorenzo, who took her with the careful reverence he showed all precious things. 20 minutes, I told him. "This won't take long." The blue study was where I conducted my most delicate business. Meetings that required absolute privacy, and the kind of authority that came from sitting behind my father's recovered desk. The irony wasn't lost on me that the furniture stolen from his office after his death had been returned to his daughter, along with everything else that was rightfully mine. My guest was already seated when I entered, a nervous-looking man in his 50s, who clutched a briefcase like a lifeline. Dr. Stevens, chief administrator of Mercy General Hospital, where this had all begun. "Dr. Costa," he stammered, rising partially from his chair. "Thank you for seeing me. Please sit." I settled behind the desk, noting how his eyes darted to the windows, the cameras, the subtle security measures that marked this as a place where important decisions were made. "You said this concerned my former colleague, Elena Vasquez." "Yes, well, there have been questions. Investigators asking about her access to restricted areas, her work schedule, her associations." Dr. Stevens wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. "The insurance company is threatening to deny coverage for the damages from that night unless we can provide satisfactory answers." "What kind of damages?" "The pediatric ward will need complete renovation. The surgical suite is a total loss. Nearly $2 million in repairs and equipment replacement." His voice cracked slightly. "Without insurance coverage, the hospital faces bankruptcy." I leaned back in my chair, studying him with the same intensity Lorenzo had once used on me. "And you think I can help with this problem? The Aurora Costa Foundation has been so generous with its donations. Your pediatric wing expansion, the new equipment for the NICU?" Dr. Stevens leaned forward desperately. "If there were some way to expedite the insurance process, or perhaps arrange bridge funding. You want me to make your problems disappear." The blunt statement hung in the air between us. Dr. Stevens's face reddened, but he nodded. "What you're asking would require significant resources, influence at the highest levels of the insurance industry, the kind of connections that don't come free." I stood, moving to the window that overlooked the city where I'd once worked double shifts to pay rent. "What are you prepared to offer in return?" "Anything. Complete cooperation with any of your foundation's initiatives. Priority access to our facilities for your research programs. Whatever you need." "What I need, Dr. Stevens, is a hospital that understands the value of discretion. A medical facility where certain questions are never asked, where certain patients receive care without excessive paperwork, where certain procedures happen without attracting unwanted attention." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed immediately by fear. "You want us to compromise our medical ethics?" I want you to expand your definition of medical ethics to include protecting people who have nowhere else to turn. I returned to my desk, opening a drawer to withdraw a check already made out for $3 million. This covers your insurance shortfall plus facility improvements. In return, Mercy General becomes a partner in my humanitarian efforts. Dr. Stevens stared at the check, and I could see him calculating the implications. The money would save his hospital, but accepting it would make him complicit in whatever operations I chose to run through his facility. The children, he said finally, the real patients, the innocent ones, will receive the best care money can buy. Cutting-edge equipment, world-class specialists, experimental treatments that most hospitals can't afford. I slid the check across the desk. I was once one of those children, Dr. Stevens. I understand their value. He took the check with trembling fingers, and I knew I had him. Another piece of the empire Lorenzo and I were building. Another resource that would serve our purposes while genuinely helping the people I'd once been sworn to protect. After he left, I returned to the nursery to find Lorenzo feeding Julia while reviewing security reports on his tablet. The domestic scene should have been incongruous, but I'd learned that the most dangerous predators were often the most devoted parents. Successful meeting? He asked without looking up from our daughter. Mercy General is now fully cooperative. Dr. Stevens has seen the wisdom of our approach. I settled into the chair beside him, watching our daughter's perfect trust as she fed. How long before she's old enough to understand what we do? Years yet. By then, the world will be different. Safer. Lorenzo's dark eyes met mine over Julia's head. We're building something that will outlast us, Aurora. An empire that protects its own. And if she chooses differently, if she wants a normal life, then she'll have that choice. But she'll have it from a position of strength, with resources and protection that most people can only dream of. Lorenzo's voice was soft but certain. Our daughter will never hide in anyone's car during a storm. She'll be the storm. I looked out at the city spreading below us, at the territory we controlled and the enemies we'd eliminated. Somewhere out there, other families were probably planning challenges to our authority. Other organizations weighing the cost of war against the Costa Empire. Let them come. The frightened nurse who had stumbled into this world by accident was gone. In her place stood someone who had chosen this life, who had paid its prices and reaped its rewards. I have a confession, I said, taking Lorenzo's free hand in mine. Only one? I'm pregnant again. Lorenzo went very still, his dark eyes widening with surprise and something deeper. Joy, perhaps, or the recognition that our family was becoming something unbreakable. How long have you known? 3 weeks. I wanted to be certain before I told you. I smiled, feeling the same wonder I'd experienced with Julia's pregnancy. Dr. Reeves confirmed it this morning. Another girl. Lorenzo set down his tablet and pulled me closer, careful not to disturb Julia but needing the contact. 2 daughters, he murmured against my hair. 2 reasons to make the world bend to our will. 2 queens for our empire, I corrected, if they choose to claim it. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, dark and promising. But here in our tower, surrounded by the wealth and power we'd claimed together, I felt nothing but anticipation. The rain that had driven me to hide in Lorenzo's car had been the beginning of everything. Now we were the storm, and the world would learn to find shelter from us. Our empire stretched before us, built on blood and love in equal measure, and in my arms, the future slept peacefully, dreaming of a world that would always bend to protect her. Some stories end with redemption, others end with transformation. Ours ended with conquest.